The Boston Bruins have been in a tough spot to start out this season, starting below 500 with a 6-7-1 record. After signing big free agents like Elias Lindholm and Nikita Zadorov in the offseason, after signing Swayman right before the season started, there was hope that the Bruins would yet again be a playoff team. So far, they have not been playing like it though, and we've seen a lot of news coming out of the Bruins that is quite worrisome. Today, we're going to be breaking down the latest trade rumors regarding Trent Frederic and contract negotiations that have kind of gone in a weird spot with Brett Marchand, as well as a potential firing involving head coach Jim Montgomery. So make sure you watch till the end as we go through all the news here today, and hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey content just like this all throughout the year. Now, it's kind of surprising to see the Bruins struggling and it not being for Swayman signing late and the maybe coldness that might have come from that situation. A lot of it stems from the offense, and we're going to get into that in a second, but you can look at my preseason predictions, and I had the Bruins winning the division, now neck and neck with the Florida Panthers, but this was mainly just because I saw that offense pretty much transitioning what we saw from last year, and that team defense staying pretty strong. But team-wide offense has been a massive problem. This stat that you're seeing sorted right now is goals for across the league, and right now the Boston Bruins are pretty definitively inside the bottom 10. But it gets a lot worse when you look at goals for per game, because right now the Boston Bruins are in an even worse position. They're tied with the San Jose Sharks with 2.43 goals per game, basically in the bottom tier, the bottom 5 in the league. They're in the same realm as the New York Islanders, man, which, trust me, is not an offense you want to be in the same tier with. But you look at the scoring throughout the roster, and it's pretty easy to see why. Pastrnak, who scored 110 points last year, is only at 6 goals, 11 points in 14 games. Marchand is about at the same pace as last season, getting around 67 points or so. He's at that pace as well. But then you go down the lineup, and you got a player, especially like a Pavel Zacha, who got 59 points last year and only 3 points in 14 games. I think the worst example, though, has been Charlie Coyle, who has been pretty consistently over these past couple of seasons a really underrated centerman for the Bruins all around. He scored 60 points last season, had a career season, and right now he has 2 goals, 0 assists in 14 games. And we also got a player like Trent Frederic, who we're going to talk later in the trade rumor aspect. He only has 3 points in 14 games after scoring 40 the season before. So when your top end guys and middle of the lineup guys aren't scoring, you're not going to be scoring too many goals. And that's how we talked about earlier in the season about surprising players like Mark Kastelik and Cole Kopke, how they've had to raise this Bruins offense in really unfortunate ways. I mean, they do not deserve to have to be carrying this lineup, but throughout, especially the first few games of the season, they had. It's a great visual, though, looking at just that fourth line for the Bruins in Kastelik, Kopke, and Beecher, and looking at just their points, their plus minus compared to the rest of the top end players. I mean, it's a night and day difference. But really, that fourth line for the Bruins has been the only one consistently playing well for this Bruins roster throughout this entire season. And that is a massive problem with how much they tried to overhaul this lineup, trying to add players like Elias Lindholm, who supposedly were coming in to fix the center situation. Well, they've been doing anything but. And then we saw head coach for the Bruins, Jim Montgomery, trying to send a message. As the Bruins were playing against the Kraken on November 3rd, you can get this tweet by Ty Anderson giving the breakdown. The Bruins have a full bench, but David Pastrnak has not logged a shift in the third period, and he would be benched for the rest of it, not playing a single shift for that last frame versus Seattle. But honestly, I really like the message that Montgomery was sending here, that your top end player, somebody that's in Pasternak's case was not playing well to start of this season, isn't immune to getting consequences for their lack of any actions whatsoever. In Pasternak's case, he's been one of the more disappointing players in the league for me this season. You can see in 14 games, 6 goals, 5 assists, 11 points. That's coming after a playoffs that also wasn't all that great for the Bruins either, and I think that leaves a sour taste in a lot of people's mouths. This is after back-to-back 110 plus point seasons, and to start out this year, I think just the big problem has just been a lack of consistency. There's times out there where he just kind of goes through the motions a little bit, is acting a little bit lackadaisical, and I think there just needs to be more urgency, more tempo, more heat on Pastrnak, and we'll see if that benching leads to success in the future. This comes after Montgomery had that whole shouting fit with Marchand and how we've seen the Bruins not start out this season all too well. It feels like they've just kind of lost the momentum and lost the message from Montgomery in general, honestly. That, to me, I think has been the big thing. They just don't look all that motivated so far, and I think that is a major problem. But I think Pastrnak was the biggest example of that lack of motivation, of that lack of consistency. Maybe he's injured and dealing with something there. That would explain a lot, honestly, but just that quickness and the tempo to his game just hasn't been there to start out. But for the Bruins to be a successful team, for them to make the playoffs, they need Pastrnak to be at an MVP level, like you could debate he was at over the last couple of seasons offensively, but just so many times where even offensively, Pastrnak has just been kind of disappointing and not really up to speed to where he should be if he's going to be carrying this Bruins team to that next upper echelon in the NHL. It just hasn't been there, and I think that's been the biggest reason why the Bruins haven't had success so far. But especially in those second line players in Zacha and Coyle, those two guys to me have been the most disappointing players. If you have a fourth line that's outplaying you as a second line, then you're not going to be in a good spot, at least long term. You can't sustain that type of play. But we've not really seen those two guys step it up at any point throughout this season. So even though Pastrnak has been extremely disappointing, those guys shouldn't feel safe either. But we started to see a little bit of a hot seat here come for Jim Montgomery and some rumors about a potential firing in the future. We had this quote from Bill Lindsay on NHL Network talking about the situation, saying that Montgomery is not going to be the coach of the Bruins by Thanksgiving. I've just got a feeling it's trending that way. The thing for me is that I am a big Jim Montgomery guy. I'm a Dallas Stars fan, so his time in Dallas is something that I fondly remember. I think it was brilliant what he was able to capture there, and especially just to start out his tenure with the Bruins, it felt like just a resurgence in their play, and in players like Pastrnak especially. But even though I love him and I love some of the systems he provides, there's a lot of times where if a coach loses the room, if he loses the momentum and the motivation from the players, then there's only so much you can do. I think he's a great coach, but if it is time, then I wouldn't blame the Bruins. They know a lot more about their locker room situation than I do, and if he has truly lost them, then a change might be needed. But I just can't help but think that if it were to happen, if he were to get fired, that it would be an exact copy of the Bruce Cassidy situation where he gets hired by someone else and almost immediately wins the Stanley Cup. I don't know if it's likely to be that dramatic, but at the same time, it feels like the Bruins have let go, if they especially fire Montgomery, of a couple of coaches here that are of high quality they might not want to lose. The next situation I want to talk about here is one that I don't think is getting talked about enough, and that's the negotiations contract-wise between Brad Marchand and the Boston Bruins. The captain of the Bruins is going to be a UFA after this year, and it seems like contract negotiations have kind of been at a stalemate. You can see, even with the Bruins' struggles this season, Marchand has still been a good producer, 10 points in 14 games, and that's after back-to-back 67-point seasons, and before that, an 80-point season back in 2022. He's definitely not going to reach that type of level again, but always, of course, a leader in a bunch of different areas on the ice and off the ice too. I think for the Bruins, there's no way they could afford to lose him, even at 36 years old. And this was really started by a report by Elliotte Friedman. He initially said that the Bruins and Marchand were nearing a 3-year contract extension to keep the captain in Boston, and then almost right after that, the report was refused shortly after the game, with Marchand stating that the information was false, and Marchand just basically called him out, saying that Elliotte likes talking about me this week. I mentioned this before, I'm not big about talking about contract stuff in the media, I'm not going to do it. But that report with Elliotte is false. I'm not going to talk about my contract stuff with the media. If I was to sign a 3-year extension, it would be signed. Elliotte is just wrong there. Now, this isn't to mean that Marchand and the Bruins aren't talking. Elliotte Friedman would expand upon that, saying, I'll say this. I don't believe contract talks have broken off between the Bruins and Marchand. I don't think this is a situation where they've stopped discussing it or they're no longer moving forward in attempts to sign an extension. So I'm not concerned about that. What someone said to me on Sunday morning was, if you're going to be wrong on this one, he thinks I'm going to be wrong on term. There's a possibility he thinks the Bruins would prefer 2 years instead of 3, and we'll see where we go here. Long term, I think this is going to get done. Now, if the reports are true here, especially with what Elliotte Friedman is reporting, then this makes a lot of sense that the contract hasn't been done yet. If it really is a stalemate over the term, that makes complete sense. I mean, Marchand's going to be turning 37 this next May. So for a team like the Bruins, of course, cap hits and everything matters that much more. If you could have Marchand expiring at 39 instead of 40, especially for a higher AAV deal, then I think that's something that you're willing to negotiate and try to maximize the most out of. It does seem, though, to be quite a bit different from the Steven Stamkos Tampa Bay situation, though, where it seems like a lot more respectful, a lot more mature on both sides, and not a lot of disrespect being flown towards the player whatsoever. It just seems like a term difference that I'm sure will probably get sorted eventually. But the last player I want to talk about here when we talk about Bruins news and what could happen in the future is Trent Frederic, who is somebody that recently found himself in trade rumors coming up. He, just like Brad Marchand, is an expiring free agent, and he's somebody the Bruins will probably have to make a decision about pretty quickly. In Freddie's case, he's somebody that scored 40 points last season after having a 31-point season in 2023. He's somebody that also saw his shooting percentage rise quite a bit, but played well all throughout that year, I thought. And this year has been a much different story. Like a lot of the Bruins middle six, he's found himself in a rough spot to start out the year. In 14 games, it's just 1 goal, 2 assists for 3 points, and seems like he's on the outside of the long-term future for Boston, which is pretty interesting since we know the Bruins always want to get a little bit younger, and he's just 26 years old. I think there's still room to grow, especially with how late he's come into the NHL, but This is going to be an interesting one here. Kevin Weeks was the first one to break this news, saying, and speaking to sources, several teams are interested in pending UFA after this season. Bruins Trent Frederic. With his size, speed, toughness, character, and skill, he's drawing attention in the marketplace. And this makes complete sense to me. He's only making $2.3 million for this year, so there's not a long-term commitment there or anything, and he is a UFA, so if he doesn't end up working out even as a mid-season trade, there's not that much that will be missed. I think, again, if I'm the Bruins, just like in the Montgomery situation, this is somebody I would like to keep, but his start to the season has not been very graceful to him, and it's kind of exposed some of the bigger issues in his game. And talking to some other Bruins fans about the situation, I'm a big fan of Freddie, so I'm a little bit biased as a Badgers fan there. But in Freddie's case, I loved him quite a bit last season, but it feels like the foot speed has kind of caught up to him again this season, that he just hasn't been impactful driving the net as much as he should, especially for how physical of a player he can be, and that is somewhat of an issue, especially for the Bruins that need those type of players to play at their best level. In Freddie's case, I still think at his best, he can be a very valuable middle sixer. I think for a lot of teams, he's exactly what they'd be looking for. A younger physical force, I think, could get a lot of attention, and for the Bruins, a pretty nice package back. I think for the Bruins, this will all come down to what Frederic is asking for in his next contract. If it is a ludicrous amount like $5 or $6 million, then I could absolutely see the Bruins getting rid of him. But if he's only asking for $1 million, $1.5 million raise, around 4.5, I personally would be fine giving that to him. He's something that I mean can be valuable, but just hasn't had the start that you're looking for. I think I'd be a lot more on the train of trading Frederic if I was the Bruins, if he was an anomaly. If all the other players on the team were bought in, if they had so much momentum in their games, that they really looked motivated, but that hasn't been the case. I mean, I could only show you a few players on that Bruins team right now that I feel like are totally bought into the systems, that are really playing at their best right now. Frederic is not an anomaly, especially on that 4 group. He is a part of this consensus group, actually, that isn't playing up to their standards. So I feel like trading Frederic, especially as a younger player, though, that has proven good things in the past, could come back to bite them. We just got word recently about the Montreal Canadiens, for example, who are looking for younger talent players that can play physical in their 4 group, and Frederic would be the exact type of player that I mean could fit that type of role. Now, I don't know if the Bruins actually traded the Montreal Canadiens, but it is an interesting thing to think about. If we actually do see a trade somehow, I think it could be a pretty fun fit with the Habs. I think you could be on the second line, maybe on the third line, though, and you bump down Gallagher there to the 4th line, and I think it would make that left wing side a lot more competitive right now. I'm not really on the side of the Montreal Canadiens buying too much. I think this start to the season is pretty exactly what I was expecting, honestly. I wasn't expecting Montreal to be a super competitive team. Even though you want to see progress, I'm not sure if trading a boatload for Frederic is going to be the answer for them, though he will be a lot of fun on that 4 group, I can admit. The big thing for the Habs is I think they'd want to trade for somebody that can reliably score goals. He scored 17 in 2023, 18 last season, but has had his shooting percentage go back down to earth this year. You really have to kind of forecast what you see Frederic being in the future if you see the Habs actually trading for him. But I see the most likely teams to trade for him, honestly, being the Nashville Predators. They're a team that could use some offense. They're down in the dumpster right now in goals for per game, and I think he could pretty easily slot in on that second line with Novak and Marchand. So Jankowski was good in a limited sample size last year, but has come back down to earth. I don't see him as a top sixer, and I think the Preds might have to fix that here soon. Another team that I could see being interested is the Red Wings. I think it'd be a pretty great fit for them specifically. You could put him on that third line. You could trade Bergeron back, who's already requested a trade, already wants to change his scenery. I think that could work out well. Really, the only thing that puts this away is, again, the Atlantic Division factor, just like Montreal. Whether the Bruins actually want to trade in their division or not, I think could affect the actual price here quite a bit. One team that I don't think you should keep your eye off of, though, is St. Louis, who I think could be in a similar position as Detroit, where you could have a younger player swap. Alexei Toropchenko was somebody I mentioned in my players that could be traded next video. Highly recommend that one. But he's somebody I think the Bruins could have a lot of interest in as this power forward who hasn't been quite able to match what he was able to do last season. Similar position as Frederic, quite honestly. And of course, in Trent Frederic's case, he's from St. Louis kid, and I think that would be a big story for them and a pretty fun one too. Now, talking about what a trade could look like if we do go in one of those similar routes as the Detroit or St. Louis swap, where we see another younger player going back like a Toropchenko or a Bergeron, I could see it being a Bergeron and a second round pick for Frederic type of deal. I don't think it has to be overly complicated. It would depend on the team, especially for the cap hits involved, but I think you could see something similar to that. But let me know your thoughts on all the Bruins talk today. What did you guys think of Jim Montgomery? Do you think he's going to be fired soon? What do you think about the Pastrnak benching, the Marchand negotiations, the Trent Frederic trade rumors? Let me know all your thoughts down below. And of course, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell if you're not already for more hockey trade rumor content just like this. And of course, share the video with all the hockey fans you guys know online and click on this card for all my trade rumor content in one playlist right there for you to binge. And I will see you guys in the next one. Have a fantastic hockey day and goodbye.